Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Tripod, Improve Photography's Nature Photography podcast. Today, I am joined by Majid Badazadian and Nick Page, and we are going to share with you the landscape photography tip-isode is what we're calling this. We're going to go rapid fire through some of the tips that we are using to get the best results when we are out in the field. So, Majid, you're first. What do you got for us?
All right, so I have a couple tips. I'll start with a pretty obvious one. Um, Look behind you. There may be this amazing thing going on right in front of you, but so many times I've turned around to see an amazing rainbow or incredible cloud formations or who knows what, but turn around, look behind you.
hmm That's so true. Like during a sunset, we're kind of like moths to a flame. Like we're staring at the sunset, and and a lot of times, the scene behind us is a much easier thing to photograph because it's a low dynamic range scene, and that's where the rainbows will be. But we get so stuck at like pointing our camera at the brightest part of the sunset that we forget that the areas around behind us 90 degrees off. A lot of times those can be more compelling scenes and easier to photograph because you're not pointing your light directly at this beaming light that is the sun. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
totally agree.
it's true not just for lighting, but also just for the subject itself. How many times have I been on a river, looking up a creek, up to a waterfall, and somebody in the workshop I see pointed down river. They're getting a long exposure of the water flowing out into the scene instead of the water coming toward the camera, and it's just a totally different look. It creates
Yep.
something completely different. So you can get stuck in a lot of different ways, not just looking at the light, but also just the subject itself. Sometimes it looks good from the opposite way. Same thing with real estate photography. Sometimes you take pictures of the front of the house, and then you walk around to the back of the house, and you're like, oh, that actually looks better, and that's going to be the main
Mhm.
cover image.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, my tip is to stop being so lazy. I have so many times worked with photographers in online classes and different things that we've done at Improve Photography who I know are really trying to get better at photography. They're spending tons of time learning Photoshop and all kinds of different things, really into it. And then we get together for an actual in the field workshop. And so many times I've seen that same photographer say, 5 o'clock is really early to be getting out there to the location. And sometimes it's 3 a.m. because we got to drive to get out there. And so I'm going to miss this one, but I'll catch up with you around 10 a.m. And it's like, wait. If you're wanting to get the photo, it's gone by 10 a.m. Or you get to the location, you're like, we've really got to hike down this really muddy area down to that spot. That's the composition down there. And they won't really want to go through that much effort. They're just kind of chatting with other people. It's fine however you want to enjoy photography if you just like doing it kind of casually. But if you're frustrated with the results you're getting, or you really want to step it up a level, it may be getting rid of a little bit of ye old laziness to get better photos.
That is so me. Like sunrise comes just way too early most of the time. Winter sunrises I can handle, but the sunrises during the summertime, they're hard. They're just so hard. But
So if you
like
see a photo with good light from Nick, it's a sunset.
pretty much. I'm primarily a sunset photographer. Like Majid, I actually got to shoot with Majid. I guess it's 2 weeks ago now, and we got up for a sunrise that is kind of all right. Like it ended up being pretty decent, but man, when we had to get up, it was like a 45-minute drive, and I had to get up so early, and I was just not feeling it. I was a whiny little boy, but once you get your coffee in you, once you get to the location, get some cold air on your face, you're awake, and suddenly you're glad that you got up, whether you get the photo or not. You got an earlier start to your day. You never regret getting up early, but just the act of getting up early sucks, and so it's always worth it.
Put the inner whiner on hold.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Hit the snooze on the whining.
Right.
Okay, so my first one is expose for the highlights. It's one of the first things that I preach and teach to all of my photography students and people coming to my workshop is exposing for the highlights. And the reason for it is if you overexpose those highlights, you're never getting them back. And unless you're bracketing your shots, doing stuff like that, you just can't ever get those highlights back. And you can always boost up your shadows and if you have a high dynamic range scene and the shadows are dark, it's better to expose for those highlights, capture those, and then boost the shadows enough to where you can see into them rather than overexpose your highlights and then try to bring them back. Because if you overexpose them and they're gone, when you try to bring them back, they're just those bright, colorful spots in the sky are just going to turn this yucky gray color. And you just never get your highlights back. So the most important thing in all of landscape photography pretty much is expose for your highlights.
All right, the next tip that I will give is maybe in one of those situations where you are just having a tough time getting everything right in the camera. You can't get your highlights right. Sometimes the light is moving quickly, or you want to try a bunch of different setups, and you want to make sure that you're getting each shot correctly. So, let's say you're shooting a mountain, the light is perfect, and you have a couple different ideas for different compositions you want to do. Sometimes in that kind of spot, I will do just a data grab. I will set up the camera. I will shoot wider than I anticipate the final photo being. I will bracket that sucker, and I will shoot a little bit of a panorama and just grab the data. And then I have the photo how I want it, and I can move on to the next one. Ideally, I want to pick one thing and really work at it and pull out the filters and spend a ton of time getting the photo tweaked in just right. But we've all been in those situations where the lighting is perfect and we just want to move and get a few more. So just do a data grab. Just do everything you can to grab as many pixels in that scene as possible and move on to the next one. It's not pretty. Most people wouldn't admit to doing it, but you know what? Sometimes it just works.
So true.
So one of my next one is when you're out there, it's really easy to just get into this space where you're thinking, okay, I've got to get my camera out. I'm here with my camera. I've got to get it out, get it on the tripod. I've got to set up my tripod legs right over here. And that process of setting up the camera and setting up the tripod legs can actually limit creativity. So what I like to do is I go to a place and experience it. So look around, keep your tripod on your backpack, keep your camera in the bag, and just look around and experience it for a little while and look at what the water's doing. If you are near water, get out your cell phone and get low to the ground and see if there's any interesting angles. You've got a 35 millimeter equivalent on an iPhone or an Android, so just get down low and see if there's an interesting angle, and just really take that time to be creative before you get the camera and the tripod out, because once you get that tripod out and the camera out, the tripod tends to grow those legs right into the ground like tree roots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great case for getting there early too. Like, this isn't my tip, this doesn't count, but getting there
This
early.
is a bonus.
I know, this is just a bonus tip. Getting there early is always a good thing because you have a chance to get there and, like Majid says, just kind of like wander around and look at all the different compositional possibilities. Because if you're there and you're immediately setting up and going into photographer mode, you're not really seeing the scene in front of you. You're just kind of like going into like working with your little electronic box mode. And if you just kind of go and munch on a Cliff Bar and watch what's happening in front of you, like, I just came back from the ocean and watching like the waves, some of the waves would come over a particular rock, or, the way the water is moving. or the way the light is playing with vegetation, whatever it is, just observing it for a little bit can really like open you up to the different possibilities that there are there. So this kind of ties into my next one. My next one is to look at the scene and try to figure out why it is that you even want to photograph it and what is the story that you want to tell. So every photo you take should have some kind of story, whether it's, you know, the way the light is playing with the tips of the wheat that I'm photographing, or, you know, the way that the water is moving through a particular piece of stream, or whatever it is. Every photo should have a story. And like, if you sit down and you really think about what it is, what the story is that you're wanting to tell, then you know what compositional things you want to include into your photo and what's going to help your photo and what's going to take away from it. So just analyzing why you want to take the photo in the first place is a step that a lot of people, especially when they're taking photos with their cell phones or they're not putting a lot of thought into it, they don't even take the time to consider stuff like that. But as you get better, it's just kind of like one of those analytical tools that really help you define what is going to help your composition and what's just going to clutter it up. So think about what it is why you want to take the photo and what the story is that you're trying to tell with the photo.
Sometimes that can be tough for landscape photography to have that story, because to say, what's the story? Tree in fog, right? Like, story
That's deep,
is
man.
it's foggy, right? Like,
All right, granted, it's not a
right.
novel. It's
But-
not a novel
right.
we're telling here.
It's a short story.
Very short
It's a
story.
short story.
Very short story. It's like a haiku.
collection of short stories.
Yeah. But one thing that I think can help you to do that is if that doesn't kind of work in your brain, if you think about it instead as just a mood that you're trying to convey, or the wonder of nature that you're trying to highlight in this. You know, the wonder of nature is color. Look at all this fall color. And so I'm going to compose this in a way to maximize color, or the incredible texture of a waterfall and how it cascades over so many different little rocks. And so I'm trying to highlight texture in this photo, or in a photo I'm just trying to show the awe, the wonder of how much is happening in this sky, like just some kind of mood or some part of nature that you're trying to highlight in the photo. I feel like that can sometimes help if you're not quite sure what the story is of nature. Well, my next tip is to dump any hurdle to you doing your work. And there are a ton of them in photography. This is why I always argue to not set the white balance in camera. If you're shooting in RAW, you can just change it afterward, and it's going to be exactly the same. And so don't set your white balance, because that's going to get in the way of you getting an awesome composition. It's going to take up your time when the lighting is good. Get rid of that cam ranger or whatever gadget is in your way. Maybe that's a great gadget. I mean, it might be good for a particular shoot, but you know, those extra gadgets that you don't really need and aren't actually helping you to take the picture, dump them. Mirror lockup, that yes, now my photo is going to be 0.1% sharper and more boring, because you're focused on so many different things, and cable releases, and I would even say the same thing about rules of composition can be the same way. Sometimes you get so locked into your head, must follow rule of thirds, that you just lose the creativity of photography. I have a ton of images in my portfolio, and I know you guys do too, that don't even loosely follow the rule of thirds, or really any other rule of composition, but they work and they look really good. So all of these things that I mentioned can certainly be helpful, and you shouldn't just not use that knowledge or those tools. What I'm saying is, you know when it's getting in the way. And like Majid said, when your tripod kind of grows roots and you lock your tripod on one spot, you get a photo that looks good, you're happy with it. That's the worst thing that can happen when you get a photo that looks good to you while you're shooting, because now what are you going to do? Well, now I'm going to bracket it with 16 frames, and I'm going to use mirror lockup and all this stuff to get 0.1% better. That if you actually did a little exploring, maybe 10 feet down, there's actually even a little bit better of a composition. And that's why I love shooting in workshops like with a group, because they make you pay for mistakes like that. When you are like, I got it, and you just kind of sat there for 20 minutes and watched the sunset as everybody else was moving around, and then you go back to the hotel at night and they show all the photos on the screen, they make you pay for it because you see, oh no, I was there messing around with mirror lockup stuff to get a 1% sharper. There's a photo that's a 5-star photo, and I only got the 3-star because I didn't move around.
Yeah, the more of that kind of stuff that you're focusing on, it kind of puts you in a very technical place. Like that's kind of my argument against some of the filter sets where you start layering different square filters on top of each other, is because you start focusing more on the equipment that you're using rather than the scene that you're capturing, and it puts you in a very technical spot where you're thinking about this gadget in your hands rather than what you're trying to stuff inside of it. And, some of the most creative people are the ones with no tripod, and they're rolling around on the ground and doing all these crazy angles and their stuff might not be very technically perfect by any means, but at the same time, they are in a very creative place. They might be on drugs, but they're also in a very creative place. And so there has to be that happy medium where you're also getting technically good quality photos. So there is the technical side that you have to abide by, but you have to also allow yourself to be free enough to be creative.
Right.
And that could be the hard part.
And that's an awesome segue into my next tip. My next tip, which is don't be afraid to be creative. Be afraid of being uncreative.
Yeah. Ooh, another haiku. We're just rolling with the poems on this. You guys, I'm going to grow a mustache for the next episode. It's only appropriate. I'm feeling that artistic.
Nice.
And thanks for setting that up perfectly, both of you.
Nice. Yes, Daniel-san. Do not be afraid of being perfect.
All right.
Okay.
My next tip is to look at a bunch of photos right before you go out and shoot. And when I say right before, I often mean like 3 a.m. in the hotel. I always look at my phone trying to wake up so I don't fall back to sleep. And I'll go and just search Google Images or Pinterest or wherever. I don't care where you're getting photos from, or 500px. And I'm just taking screenshots or downloading the photos that I see that are cool. It doesn't matter if it's the same location. In fact, I try not to use the same location. I'll just look at cool, inspiring photos right before I get out and shoot. And so often it gets me thinking on a different frame of mind that I would normally be in for that. I'll look and I'll see, oh man, that's a great panorama. And then I'll think about it like, oh, you know what? I haven't shot a panorama in a few weeks. And you'll go and shoot a panorama or whatever it is, you know what I mean. And then sometimes if I'm out in the scene and I'm kind of feeling a little bit uncreative, then I will just fire up my phone and look at the Photos app and just kind of flip through a few things. I'm like, oh, I could do a super dark version of this or whatever it is. Just having those fresh ideas right before you shoot can help get you out of a rut.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. I'm thinking like of this word like primer. It's almost like you're using other people's photos as a creative primer for yourself. And when you go out, I would caution almost like if you're going to a location and you look a bunch of photos of that location, then it could almost limit creativity.
Yeah,
because you're just going to go there and that's all you're going to see, or it's going to be very hard to see outside of, the staples, the mainstream compositions that are always shot of a certain location. But you're actually looking at work in general. And I haven't heard of anyone doing that before, but that's a really interesting way to kind of get those creative juices going.
It's like a musician listening to music right before they go to perform a totally different song, just getting into the groove. It helps you get in the mood or, in that space where you're feeling it, because there's nothing worse than trying to go from, math class to doing photography, or doing something very technically heavy to doing photography, because you're not going to be in a creative space at all, and you kind of need to be in that creative space. So It's very similar to one of my tips was going to be look at the work of others to get inspired, and not necessarily like when you're going out to shoot, but more just in general. Like the more photography you look at, the more you're going to see what's possible. And don't look at just the same photographers over and over and over and over, because if you do that, eventually you're going to turn into a cover band of those photographers and you're just going to be recreating their work. You want to have a wide, diverse, versatile set of influences that you can take bits and pieces of and then create something new. Much like in music, everybody has their influences. I listen to this kind of drumming and I also listen to this kind of drumming and I create this kind of drumming. You want to do a very similar thing with your photography. Don't look at just the same people over and over, even though they're awesome and you admire their work. Because if you look at their type of photography and only their type of photography, eventually you are going to just emulate their type of photography. So try to have a wide, diverse set of influences as well.
One way that
yeah.
I like to find those diverse influences is by looking at iPhone photography. Like on Instagram, there are all these Instagram celebrities that have a bunch of photos, and they aren't like really even photographers. They just like travel a lot, or they, just take a bunch of cell phone photos, or whatever it is. They're just, it's just different. They're not like photographers. They're just Instagrammers. I don't know how to explain it, but you know what I mean if you're on it.
They're the creative people rolling around on the ground when you're out
exactly.
there.
That's
they're the
right.
ones having fun.
And you see all kinds of just different styles when you look at that Instagram kind of photo. It's totally different from what a photographer would do, but it's cool and it's different.
Yep, absolutely. So another tip that I have is that bad weather makes for good photos. And I know Majid and I were talking before we started recording that he could argue that changing weather makes for good photos, but I think bad weather makes for good photos. And
then you'll love the Oregon coast.
Yeah, well, and so by bad I mean stormy and cloudy and ominous, or windy. Like shooting in really high winds offers a completely different set of atmospheric looks. Like if you go to the sand dunes in Southern California and you're photographing in high winds, you're going to get so much cool atmospheric stuff going on. You're going to get dust in the air and it just makes for really cool photos. Or if you're you're photographing in a blowing snowstorm, that's going to be a completely different look. And it's going to kind of lead into another tip that I have, but just shooting in those kind of environments, it's something that not everybody sees, and it definitely gives you a mood. Granted, it's a very, typically a dark, ominous mood, but it's a mood and it's a feeling that you're passing on. So, it may not be the beautiful beach in the middle of the day with blue skies and blue water look, but it's definitely going to convey a feeling and a mood, and it always makes for interest because during those storms, you're always going to have very ominous clouds, and those ominous textured clouds are going to add drama and interest in your skies. And so
you must have some interesting looking bad weather, because when I think bad weather, I think 18 days straight of rain and gray skies.
Well, that's because you're from Western Oregon.
No cloud interest, just a blob of gray. So
when I think bad weather, I think of thunderstorms and hailstorms and snowstorms.
I can agree with you.
Okay, so maybe I should say stormy weather makes for good photos. How about that? Does that make you happy, Majid?
It does.
It'd be better if it was a haiku.
It makes an imperfect segue into my next tip, which is don't trust your display. So if you're out in the middle of the night and you think you just took a beautiful star shot,
especially this one.
Your display is lying right to your face. Look at the histogram. Look at the histogram and understand how histograms work, and make sure you're getting a proper exposure, because light is changing all the time around you, and you can't trust what you see on the back of your screen. You just can't.
Yeah, with the first several times you go out and do night photography, you go out all excited after that long exposure and it pops up on the LCD and you're like, yes, that looks so cool. And you'll be all excited. You'll take a bunch of photos, go back to Lightroom and you're like, wait, all the photos are like almost pure black. And you're like, it didn't look like this on the LCD screen. Night photography, you're just going to be so messed up on the back of the screen because it's so dark around you that you just can't judge it right. So that was a perfect example, Majid. You got to look at that histogram in some situations. And as you get more used to your camera, you'll find that you need to look at that histogram a little bit less because you can judge it on the LCD if it's a camera that you're used to and you kind of know where you're going to get tricked, like in night photography and stuff. So I wouldn't say you need to look at it every single time you go shoot, but if it's a newer camera or you're kind of in a more tricky situation, definitely something you want to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last one is going to be that different perspectives make for more compelling photos. And by different perspectives, I'm not just talking about like your perspective to the subject. Granted, sometimes that can be a really compelling photo, like if you get your camera really down low to the ground where our eyes are typically not seeing the average scene. Or it could be talking about like macro photography. Macro photography is something that we don't see with our own eyes. That way, therefore, when we see a photo of it, it's interesting to us because, whoa, I don't know what that looks like with my own eyes. You know, it's just something we're not used to looking at. And that's also what makes sunrise and sunset photos more interesting than middle of the day photos, because it only happens twice a day. It doesn't happen every day. If you live in Western Oregon like Majid, it doesn't hardly ever happen. But but that's why they make for more interesting photos, is because it's a more rare occurrence that you're photographing. That's why photos of rainbows are so awesome, because they don't happen all the time. And when they do happen, not everybody gets to witness it. So photographing things that people are not accustomed to seeing in everyday life, those always make for more interesting photos, whether it's a really ominous tornado going through a wheat field, or whether it's lightning, or whether it's stuff like that where people don't see that stuff because they're smarter than us and they go indoors when it's happening, or it's a rainbow that's beautiful, but we're not always in the position to see that stuff. So what makes a photo compelling is the fact that it's not something you see in everyday life. Those things you see in everyday life are typically not nearly as interesting to look at in a photo, like person riding a bicycle across the street. Who cares? a rainbow over the top of Crater Lake, a blown up volcano. That's awesome. So stuff like that, things that you don't see in everyday life, always make for more compelling photos. And whether that's getting down low to the ground with a completely different perspective on the world, or it's macro photography and it's a magnification of the world we're not used to seeing, or maybe it's a super wide angle lens that's just not how our eyes work. Those are the kinds of things that make for more compelling photos, especially to non-photographers.
That works very well into my next tip. And this is a tip to overcome one of the two biggest problems that I see, and I know is the same for you guys, as we've talked about this in the many episodes of Tripod that we've done. If every photographer would do two things, you would be better than 95% of the landscape photographers out there. So here they are. Capture good light in your photo. If the light is just normal daylight, it's not okay. And the second one is include a foreground. If you do those two things, you're better than 95% of the landscape photographers out there, and your photos are going to stand out as being something different. So this is the tip for number 2, getting some kind of foreground in your photos. As many times as we've talked about this, when I do portfolio reviews, I say it almost every single time that there isn't enough of a foreground in the photos. And so this will help you to get there, is put your tripod at knee height for the next 6 months. When you just are normally just extending the legs of your tripod and you normally extend all 3, just for the next 6 months, just put it at knee height. When you're shooting at knee height, it's pretty tough to not include some kind of foreground. Now, I wouldn't at all say that every photo you take should be from knee height. And sometimes it's a lot lower than that, and sometimes it is standing height. But when you are at knee height, there will be a foreground. And so it can really help to overcome that problem in your mind.
Absolutely.
My last tip, and the last tip we have for you today, make your own luck. So don't depend on or don't get upset because you think somebody is just so lucky. And that's the only reason their photos can be great. Make your own luck. Understand how weather works. Put yourself in a situation to succeed. There's not really ever a guarantee, but there's probabilities. And if you put yourself in a situation where there's a chance that something great can happen, then eventually something great will happen. Mm-hmm. So that's how you make your own luck, is putting your feet on the ground and getting yourself in a situation where something great will happen.
That's so true. I get skunked on it all the time, but anytime that I see a little gap on the horizon and lots of cloud cover, I always get my hopes up. Like, this could be awesome. And then, 1 out of 5 times it is. But there's those other 4 times where I go out and I'm like, man, what a waste of time. But 1 out of those 5 times, that little gap on the horizon is going to just light up all of those clouds overhead. And those end up being the photos that go into my portfolio. So if I don't at least do the work to go out in those situations, I'll never get that 1 out of 5 photo. And you just have to keep putting yourself in a position to be lucky. And that's by looking at the horizon every night and watching your weather apps and stuff, and just trying to do your homework so you can put yourself in that situation.
Very good. Well, that is our landscape photography tip episode for you. But there are 2 more things we want to give to you. One, I want to tell you a little bit about Improve Photography Plus. And also, Nick has some inspiration of the week for us. Improve Photography Plus is something that I have wanted to do for a long time. Over the last more than 5 years that Improve Photography has been in existence, we have made a ton of photography trainings for you guys. We have 7 online photography classes, some of the premium classes like my lighting and a flash tutorial. We have the short tutorials like Nick's sky replacement tutorial. We have photography contracts on there if you're selling a print or something like that, or a contract with a wedding client. We just have a ton of different stuff. If you were to buy all of the products, this is cool. I didn't know this until I added it up this week. If you were to buy all of that stuff that we've made over the last 5 years, all those different products, you would pay $1,881. It's crazy. And so I want them to get out to all of you and not just collect dust. And so I made Improve Photography Plus, which is a subscription site for $19.95 a month. You are getting 195 video tutorials. You're getting over 200 Lightroom presets and tons of other stuff. It's not just videos. And it's there for $19.95. We need your support with Improve Photography Plus. Improve Photography, I think, has the most free content of any photography website out there. We're doing free workshops. Nobody does that. We have lots of stuff. We're doing a podcast every day. A new podcast on the Improve Photography Network is being released. We are releasing so much for you. We can't continue to do it. We can't expand on those things that we want to do without your support. And we're putting everything that we have behind Improve Photography Plus now. You can get everything we do for $19.95 a month. And there is no contract, no long-term contract to be an Improve Photography Plus. I think you are going to get more than what you pay for. In addition to that is something that is very relevant to those of you who listen to this podcast. And that is, after you've joined Improve Photography Plus, you have the option to upgrade your subscription to a mentoring subscription. And with that, you can work directly with me, with Nick, with Majid, and some of the other hosts of Improve Photography podcasts. And you can, send us photos to get feedback. You can call us on the phone. You can email us. We'll have monthly challenges to talk with you, and you'll get all of the products that we do with Improve Photography. Going forward, the Improve Photography free workshops that we do are going to be first available to Improve Photography Plus members, where I would assume they would sell out. We do need your support to do it, and we're giving you an incredible bargain to get there. This is a dramatic and kind of scary price reduction on all of the things we do to make them all available for this. So check out Improve Photography Plus. I expect that the mentoring seats will sell out very fast. April 11th is when it is being released. But don't fear. Just you can get your Improve Photography Plus subscription, and then you can get on the wait list to work with a mentor as soon as there's a spot available. So something that I am very excited about doing.
Very cool. All right, so this week's inspiration of the week is Justin Resnick. Excellent photographer, again from the Pacific Northwest, but he does all kinds of workshops, and he's got work from all across the world. Make sure you go check him out. And also I wanted to throw in that I do have 2 seats available on my second Palouse tour, and then we're going to be all sold out. So if you're interested in that, go over to nickpagephotography.com.
What are the dates on that?
It's the last weekend in May. So what is that? The 29th through 31st, I believe. I don't know.
It's coming.
Look at a calendar. It's the last weekend in May is the one we still have a couple seats for.
Okay, very cool.
Yep.
And so definitely check that out. Also, if you are looking for a flight to go visit Nick to go shoot in his workshop, which is really well priced, check out skyscanner.com or Kayak Explore. I've been using those websites, and if you'll do that, it'll show where you're starting, and then you can look at the couple airports right around Washington where Nick is. And I found some sweet deals of places that's like, hey, I've never really thought about shooting in South Carolina before, but what the heck, like a flight is $199, right? Like, I'm sure there's something to shoot. And so check that out. And you may find that it's not that expensive at all to go to a workshop like that. So check it out on nickpagephotography.com.
Jim couldn't afford not to photograph in South Carolina.
That's right. How do you not go? You have to go.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Tripod. You can check out Majid on Instagram at MajidB, or on his website, which you'll never spell. And so just go to improvephotography.com/M, and that's a hot link to get to his website. Nick is at nickpagephotography.com, and he's also on Facebook. And for everything that I do, just go to improvephotography.com. Go check out Improve Photography Plus. It's being released April 11th, and I know you'll love it. I've been putting an insane amount of work into making sure it's beautiful and works right. See ya.